Good evening, and welcome to my new channel, Parascience Investigations. Um, Obviously, as you can see on screen here, tonight I'm going to be reading some of the pages of the document, the C.I.A. documents, the released, disclosed documents about the Gateway experience. There is 29 pages in total. I think I may get through maybe the first 2 or 3 pages, but we'll see how we crack on. So, let's start at the very top. Approved for release in 2003, 9th of the 10th, regarding the C.I.A. document number there, as you can see. Department of the Army, the U.S. Army Operational Group. It's the Department of Defense of the United States of America. Now, this was sent, headed to the U.S. Army Operational Group, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, Fort George, Meade, Maryland. And this is dated as a document of the 9th of July, 1983. It took quite a while for them to actually release it. 20 years, actually. The subject is the analysis and the assessment of the Gateway process. And it's titled to Commander of the U.S. Army Operational Group at Fort Meade, Military Defense Group 2755. We'll start. Number 1. You tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely and involved and difficult process business. Initially, based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources for information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of the human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain's hemisphere synchronization technique employed by the Gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving the Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomena of the out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and to put it in a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. So, what I kind of basically understand what he's saying there is he took a very scientific approach and he found the best ways to explain everything that he'd found in a very scientific way within the foundations of the way the mind works, etc., biomedicals, or what happens on the body at the same time, what happens to the brain at the same time. Anyway, number 2. I began the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation, so that their objectives and mode of functioning could be compared in the reader's mind with the gateway experience as the model of its underlying mechanics was developed. Additionally, that introductory material is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicate at times these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the gateway experience. So what he's basically saying there is he found that hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation are all different ways that you can actually jump into the gateway experience and maybe possibly enhance or speed up the process of getting into it and delving deeper into it. So anyway, number 3, that moves on to another page. Let me scroll down so you can come with me. Number 3 is at the very top there now. So Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, "You are not thinking, you are merely being logical." The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualizations that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So, to borrow Dr. Bohr's mode of expression, parts of this paper will require not only logic but a touch of right brain initiative insight to achieve the complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. Again, so what he's basically saying is he's giving a reference to the Niels Bohr. He literally gives a quote unquote reference. You're not thinking, but you're just merely being logical. So what he's basically saying is keep an open mind. Don't just think of it in the complete logical scientific kind of way. Okay. So number 4. And going a bit. There we go. Number 4. Paradoxically, having gone to such great lengths to avoid trying to render judgments based on an occult or dogmatic frame of reference, in the end I found it necessary to return, at least briefly, to the question of the impact of the gateway experience on the common belief systems. I did so because although it was essential to avoid attempting to render an assessment in the context of such systems, I felt that it was necessary, after having completed the analysis, to point out that the resulting conclusions do not do any violence to the fundamental mainstream of either Eastern or Western belief systems. Unless that point is clearly established, the danger exists that some people will reject the whole concept of the gateway experience in the mistaken belief that it contradicts and is therefore alien to all that hold it to be true and right, to be right and true. Sorry. Yeah, I kind of get that. Yeah, he's trying to set it out so it's not religion based. It's not kind of like, yeah, if anything, it's everything all collectively put together. That's what he's saying there. So it's not like, it's not a stab in the dark at like kind of, oh, Hinduism bad. Right, okay, let's move on. Number 5. This study is certainly not designed to be the last word on the subject, but I hope that the validity of its basic structure and of the fundamental concepts upon which it is based will make it a useful guide for other Usain's personnel who are required to take the gateway experience or work with gateway materials. Now, that segment was written by Wayne M. McDonald, who's a Lieutenant MI Commander, and that was his little brief thing in there. So, he's going to be obviously the main guy that's going to be doing this with us, because he said that he had a friend that joined him. I've busy this. Right, anyway, so we're going to move on to the brain hemisphere synchronization, or also known as hemisync. So the gateway experience, the brain hemisphere synchronization in perspective. Number one, introduction, underlined, period. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, brackets, the gateway experience, involving brain hemisphere synchronization, or a hemisync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which underlay operation of related methods of hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe what gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that share some common aspects with the gateway experience, but which are nevertheless different. In this way, we can develop a frame of understanding about the gateway by comparison as we proceed. Okay, so you're going to explain about hypnosis firstly, so we'll go into that. And number two, it goes on. Hypnosis, underlined period. According to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Isaac Bentoff, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers, and the lower cerebral, the emotional portions, and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain, following successful disengagement of this stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning the meaning prior to allowing the passage to the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere of the mind, which functions as the non-critical, holistic, non-verbal, and pattern-orientated component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom or through reduction of a soporific semi-sleep state, external stimuli to include hypnotic suggestions, then they are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere, where they are accepted and acted upon directly. The result may involve emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, the sensory and motor responses required involvement of the cortex, and so on. Both the sensory and the points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to points in the body. It's the exhibit 1 down on the next page. The stimulation of the corresponding area on the cortex causes intermediate response in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, induction of the suggestion that the left leg is numb, if it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged and is referred to the appropriate area of the sensory cortex, it will result in the electrical reaction being generated, and that will induce the feeling of numbness. Similarly, the suggestion that the person is experiencing a general feeling of happiness and well-being would be referred to the appropriate pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral portion or in the cortex of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as one that informs the hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration of powers of memory would be responded to it in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity which normally held in the reserve as a result of the left hemisphere selection and control processes. So this aspect will become significant in the context of the gateway process when attention is given to examining the way that the hypnosis may be used to accelerate the progress in the early stages of the gateway experience. So basically, in a nutshell, what he's saying there is if you can get somebody to go into a hypnotic state at the beginning of this gateway experience, you can induce a state of mind that helps them to get into it a lot quicker. Makes sense. Unfortunately, I don't get hypnotized too easily. Right, so we got a little bit at the bottom of this page, and then we've got some pictures. Yay! So number 3 of this explanation of hypnosis and transcendental meditation and biomedical is, as we go along now, transcendental meditation or transcendental. Yeah. Transcendental. Yeah, that's the word. Transcendental meditation, on the other hand, means that the meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense and protracted single-minded concentration of the process of drawing energy up to the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be the creation of an acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the grey matter in the cerebral cortex. We'll go over some pictures for you. These are the parts of the brain that are actually being affected by this. For a second. Move down. So yeah, anyway, basically what he's saying in that little bit there before we move on the other hand, transcendental meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, the intense and protracted single-minded concentration of the process drawing energy up through the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be the creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, then conducted to the grey matter in the cerebral cortex. On the right-hand side of the brain. As a result, according to Bentoff, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus. I said it right. Starting from the toes and upwards into the body, up to the brain, etc. The Bentoff biomedical model, as described in the book of Lee Sennella, Military Defense, entitled Kundalini Psychosis of Transcendence, states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of an altered rhythm of heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation. And this set up a sympathetic vibration in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities, which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain. In addition, according to Bentoff, the states of bliss described by those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed the full loop along the hemisphere may be explained as a self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain caused by the circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. Bentoff also notes that most of the described symptoms start on the left of the body, that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere, although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or so is required to bring up the Kundalini. So you have to be doing that for quite a while. You have to be really tuned in with your meditation to be able to do that. Bring up the Kundalini. Bentoff states that exposure to mechanical or acoustical vibrations in the range of 4 to 7 Hertz cycles per second for protracted periods may achieve the same effect. Bentov cites as an example repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produced that range of vibrations, or being exposed for long periods of times to these frequencies caused, for instance, by an air conditioning unit. He also notes the cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous physio kundalini sequence in susceptible people who have a particularly high sensitive nervous system. Right, I get you. Okay. So the meditation side of things would seem the main key there is obviously it takes a long time, and it's a very practiced thing that you do as well. That's very good. Right, so let's move on to the biofeedback. Right. Excuse me. Number 4, biofeedback, underlined period. The third consciousness altering methodology, which will be briefly described, is biofeedback. Biofeedback is somewhat unique in that it actually employs the self-cognitive powers of the left hemisphere to gain access to such areas of the right hemisphere of the brain, as the lower cerebral, the motor and sensory cortices, and associated pain or pleasure centers. Instead of suppressing the left hemisphere, as is done in hypnosis, or largely bypassing or ignoring it, as is done in the transcendental meditation, biofeedback teaches the left hemisphere first to visualize the desired result, and then to recognize the feelings associated with the experience of successful right hemisphere access to the specific lower cerebral cortex. Pain or pleasure or other areas in the manner needed to produce the desired result. Special self-monitoring devices, such as the digital thermometer, are used to inform the left brain when it succeeds in keying the right hemisphere into accessing the appropriate area. Once this is done, the left brain can then repeatedly instruct the right brain to re-establish the pathways involved so as to produce the same external objective measures of success. In this way, the pathways are strengthened and emphasized to such an extent that the left brain consciousness is embedded or enabled to access the appropriate areas in the right brain using a demand mode. For example, if the subject wishes to increase the circulation in the left leg in order to speed up healing, he may concentrate with his left brain on achieving that result while carefully monitoring a digital thermometer connected to the left leg. When the concentrated effort begins to achieve the success, the digital thermometer will register an increase in temperature in the left leg. At that point, the subject can then mentally, left brain, emphasize by memory recall, and the same process to cause its strengthening by affirmation and repetition. In this way, pain can be blocked, healing can be enhanced, malignant tumors can apparently be suppressed and ultimately destroyed. The body's pleasure centers can be stimulated, and a variety of specific physiological results may be achieved. In addition, biofeedback may be used to greatly accelerate achievement of deep meditative states, particularly for beginners. We're on page 6 now, actually. So yeah, in addition, the biofeedback may be used as an acceleration to achieve deep meditative states, particularly for beginners who have no experience in meditative techniques and whose progress in that mythology is enhanced through the effective visualization and external objective affirmation. Okay, so Right, I get it. So biofeedback, I didn't know what biofeedback was until I just read that properly. So a display of the subject's brainwaves pattern on a cathode ray tube has proven to be a laboratory validated means by which subjects may quickly learn to place themselves in profound relaxed states, categorized by the sort of quietude and singularity of mental focus associated with advanced meditation. Ooh. If you struggle to meditate, biofeedback, and hypnosis obviously doesn't help you as well, then biofeedback is probably a different way of trying stuff. All right, I'm going to read this last bit, 5 and 6. I'm going to read, and then we'll call it there, and we'll come back and do some more for maybe next week, actually, in a few days, in a couple of 3 days. But if you have watched so far and you are with me, I do thank you very much for being here. And yeah, let's crack on. Let's get on with this, shall we? So, number 5, gateway and hemisync. Now that we have briefly profiled the basic mechanics of the principal techniques for altering or expanding consciousness, which share some of the objectives and/or methods employed in the gateway experience, we may proceed to focus on what technique actually involves. Fundamentally, the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and a coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and the right hemispheres, so as to alter the consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere, so as to ultimately escape when the restrictions of time and space, even the restrictions of time and space. The participant then gains access to the various levels of initiative knowledge which the universe offers. What differentiates the gateway experience from forms of meditation is its use of the hemisync technique, which is defined in a monograph by the Monroe Institute trainer Melissa Yeager as, quotes, a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency, close brackets. Although hemisync seems to be rather rare and of only short duration in ordinary human consciousness, Melissa Yeager states that, quotes, audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can induce and sustain hemisync with the Institute's basic focus-free tapes. She also notes that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have also shown that subjects with 20 years of training in Zen meditation could possibly consistently establish the hemisync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. Dr. Stuart Twemlow, a psychiatrist and a research associate of the Monroe Institute, reports that, brackets, in our studies of the effect of the Monroe tape system on brainwaves, we have found that the tapes encouraging the focusing of brain energy. It can be measured with a light bulb in watts into a narrower and narrower frequency band. This focusing of energy is not unlike the yoga concept of one-pointedness, which we may translate in Western terms as a single-mindedness. Dr. Twemlow goes on to observe that the individual gets into the tapes beyond focus-free. There is a gradual increase in the brainwave size, which is a measure of brainwave energy or power. Oh, wow. So it's actually measurable, and it has actually been proven to expand the focus and the brainwave pattern. That's pretty good. Right, I'm just going to read this last little bit here. This is where we're up to number 6, and it's lamp versus laser. Underlined, and here we go. Melissa Yeager uses a metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of the hemisphinx in the gateway experience. She points out that the human mind, in its natural state, can be likened to an ordinary lamp, which expends energy in the form of both heat and light, but in a chaotic, incoherent way, which diffuses its energy over a wide area rather than limited depth. On the other hand, the human mind, under the discipline of hemisync, acts after the fashion of a laser beam, which produces a disciplined stream of light. The stream of energy is projected with total coherence of both frequency and amplitude, such that the surface area of a laser beam contains billions of times the concentrated energy found in a similar surface area on the Sun. Gateway assumes that once the frequency and amplitude of the human brain are rendered coherent, it is possible to begin accelerating both, so that the human mind is soon resonating at even higher vibrational levels. The mind can then bring itself into synchronization with more sophisticated and rarefied energy levels in the universe. The mind, when operating at these increasingly rarefied levels, is assumed to be capable of processing the information and thus received through the same fundamental matrix by which it makes sense of ordinary physical sensory input. To achieve meaning in a cognitive context, such meaning is usually perceived visually in the form of symbols, but may also be perceived as an astonishing flashes of holistic intuition, or even in the form of scenarios involving both visual and oral perception. The mechanics by which the mind exercises the consciousness function will be addressed in more detail later in this paper. Wow. So we're on page 6 of 29. Oh, sorry, we're on page 7 of 29 now. And number 7, which will be frequency following response. Again, I thank you. We've been going, what, half an hour now? Yep. I don't want to make it too long. I don't want to make it too dragged out or anything. We can break it down. We can go back onto this. I will do a couple of live streams where I'll get a couple of people on. We can pick certain things of this apart. We can question other bits and pieces of it, etc., as we go along. But this is something that I'm doing. I'm actually doing the gateway experience. When I say I'm doing it, let me clarify. I'm attempting to use the hemisync and the gateway experience program, we'll call it, to as it says, to expand my mind and to tap into something that I know I've previously tapped into. I didn't know how I did it, etc., but I did, as we do. So yeah, that's just the universe seems to be calling me a lot recently, and it's given me a lot of answers about questions I got, and that's genuine as well. I do genuinely sit and ask the universe kind of questions and stuff, and I just leave it in that ball, and woe behold, literally within a day, genuinely within 24 hours, that question's been answered one way or another. Which is quite weird, but it works. It works for me. So, but yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming along. Thank you for being here. My name is Sab. This is Parascience Investigations, and I shall see you all again very soon. Thank you very much.